This episode of From Angel to Exit is brought to you by Align 5. Align 5 specializes in mergers and acquisitions for growth-focused entrepreneurs and family businesses. With decades of buy and sell side experience, they prioritize client alignment, avoiding conflicts of interest common in other firms. Align 5 delivers above average industry results by customizing strategies for diverse industries, ensuring optimal valuations and securing strategic acquisitions or exit partners. If you want to find out more, check out align5.com. That's align, the number 5.com. Are you serious about planning a successful business exit? From Angel to Exit is your go-to resource. Subscribe to our newsletter at eckfeldt.com/podcast for even more valuable insights. And to get personalized guidance, take our free exit readiness assessment. It's just 24 questions, and it will give you a clear picture of your exit readiness. Find the assessment at eckfeldt.com/exit. Submit your results, and we'll schedule a free follow-up call to discuss your specific situation and the best way to maximize your valuation and ensure a successful transaction. Now, back to the episode. Welcome, everyone. This is From Angel to Exit. I'm Bruce Eckfeldt. I'm your host. Our guest today is Shanken. He is founder and CEO, formerly of Jornaya. We're going to hear about that story. He's doing some interesting stuff today. I'll let him explain kind of the current ventures he's on. And we're going to hear a little bit of his background, about his journey, and really talk about what he's learned as a founder and CEO, having exited. Excited for this. Ross has really had some really amazing experiences and doing some interesting work. So I'm sure there's going to be lots of great nuggets in here. So with all that, Ross, welcome to the program.
It's great to be here, Bruce.
Yeah, no, thank you for being on. So before we dig into kind of the exit story and Jornaya and the work you're doing today, I would love to just get some background and kind of hear like your experience professionally as an entrepreneur. Like, what inspired you to actually get into the, become an entrepreneur, be a CEO, and really kind of get an understanding of like what that journey was like for you before you even started things. So
yeah,
give a little background. Tell us the story.
Sure. So coming out of college, I think a lot of my college friends were heading to Wall Street or consulting or professional careers, going to law school or med school, and those were kind of the tracks. And they were pretty attractive tracks if they worked for you. Good money coming out of college, and made your parents happy that they spent that money on education and get a good job, with quotes. Yep. And I always, so I was sort of, there was a gravity pull towards that, and I guess I was fortunate in one way that I had a supportive father who sort of understood that I wasn't feeling my own personal pull towards those things. They were tempting because the track was kind of set for you, but I just felt like I wanted to create. I wouldn't have used that word back then. I think I would have said, I don't want to be on someone else's track. Maybe I would have said that. Okay. But I, looking back, I really wanted to create, innovate, build something from nothing ultimately. And so that's where my energy just was naturally or, conditioned to go through my upbringing for whatever there is.
I'm curious, did you have were there any role models specifically of like, I wanted to be like so-and-so, or like some kind of vision that you had early?
Yeah, probably. Looking back, it's a good question because I don't know that I've ever really asked that of myself, but there were a couple of uncles who were in business, and there were they weren't necessarily put on pedestals in our family. There were some things that were and some things that weren't. And so I think I was kind of trying to figure out, but I was drawn towards it. Yeah. These were people who really blazed their own path and all the good and bad of that. I think, some of my family was maybe almost discouraging that because it's like, seems really sexy and fun. And, you're seeing them on the other end of that, and they have money and nice cars, but
survivor bias.
I'm not sure you understand what can happen there, and it's risky. But on the other side, I think I was always drawn towards it for those reasons at that young age. I think outside of that, I had a natural pull towards some of the big names in tech, like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. And back then, those were probably the two. Yeah. And I just thought it was so cool that they didn't go to school or dropped out of school, and they just kind of did their own thing. So there's a recurring theme you're already hearing about doing your own thing and kind of blazing your own trail. But technology also was an early interest. And so those two things coming together, like I had 10 years old, my dad had the foresight to buy a TRS-80 computer. I don't know if you remember the Radio Shack. and I'm like programming in BASIC, and I always loved that stuff. Early on in my career, I got involved in data and like learning how to use information and technology together, and that led ultimately to some business success. So it was kind of the coming together of my pull towards tech, the people I knew who were in business, but they weren't in technology, the people I didn't know that were in technology, and they had built great businesses around that. So that gives more color.
Yeah. And what was your education? What did you do for early education? How did that play into the business world?
Yeah, so education was public high school and then Haverford College, a small liberal arts school outside of Philadelphia, if you've heard of it. And, so that was about the extent of it. I majored in political science, so it's kind of like, how'd you end up here? But I always say I learned at Haverford how to write, how to speak.
Yeah.
I did take some computer science and math classes, but not a ton. I kind of knew enough to be dangerous. I had maybe some natural mind for it, but didn't want to like live inside of math and computer science every day and code, but I liked it. And then I really liked business. I had a business at Haverford.
Oh, interesting.
Like importing clothing that another cousin had like figured out this import from Pakistan, these sweaters and booties. And so I was always trying to sell stuff there. And I don't think I had put two and two together yet that, to sell more and more of that, you have to set up your shop and sell more of it and get people to come and make sure you can have good days and bad days. And it hadn't clicked yet that software is like what I now know how to say, make money while you sleep. But I think I learned that shortly after college as I started looking at the jobs that I was looking to fulfill. So
And so how did you kind of get into the business world and tell us a little bit about the professional experience?
So I had all these tracks available to me, and I just didn't take any of them. And I took my senior summer down the shore, the Jersey Shore, where I'd been every summer in college, just making money, having fun. And I came back without a job, and most of my friends were in New York. And so I was just trying to figure it out, and started going to some Haverford alumni meetups and things. And I went to one in New York. And there was a graduate from 10 years earlier who was working at his father's investment bank, but he had started this company out of his father's bank, which was, so him and a few of his friends were trying to take excess money and invest in the stock market. And I knew a little bit about the stock market, like from my dad, from the newspaper. And if you dial all the way back to like the early 90s, the only way you could invest was you could look at the newspaper every day to see the ticker symbols. You had to wait till the next morning. You could go to the library or pay money to get like a Dun & Bradstreet report or like an S&P report. This is like, that's the extent of investing. And if you want to buy or sell, you got to pick up a phone. You don't have one on you, and you call your broker and pay a fee to buy or sell stock. Like that was not that long ago, like 30 years ago. And what this guy had started figuring out was that the fax machine, this is just pre-internet. It's a year or two before the internet. And he's like, the fax machine is a lot faster transmittal of data. So he had started this, I would say like almost a hobby, but a little company called Wall Street by Fax. And had started to put stuff together. I met him.
Very innovative name.
What's that?
Very innovative name.
Yeah. I mean, it's very descriptive. Ended up changing it to Wall Street on demand later once it was converted to an internet company. And did pretty well, but like he's talking to me about it, and I'm just fascinated because it's technology, it's your own business, your own path. I'm like, this is cool. And they were looking for somebody to come join them without all the skills that I had. I was also interviewing for like trading jobs, and they needed like Lotus 1-2-3 experts. Just pre-Excel, and I had to like learn Lotus and try to interview for those jobs. I got a lot of offers, but this one intrigued me, and I ended up working for him for a couple of years up in New York. So I moved to New York, and that got my start in data, technology, some really cool stories about how he taught me to, unusual way of onboarding somebody that I can get into if it's interesting.
Yeah, well, I'm fascinated because I always find that these early experiences end up having a huge influence. So, like, what are some things that you learned there that really kind of gave you direction or kind of give you strategies or an approach to really doing business or managing people and managing business?
If I separate it into like two parts. One is just me. So I'm like a 22-year-old, sort of cocky, pretty smart kid, but like think I'm smarter than I am. I think I know more than I do. So I'm like, well, I know how to maneuver all this stuff. And meanwhile, like, so he's 10 years my senior, but he was very, I would say, sort of kind in his approach.
Okay.
And I would say not nice, but kind. The distinction being he wasn't going to baby me or, glad handle me. And so I show up for like my first week of work, and he's like, well, do you know how to use Microsoft Word? I'm like, oh yeah, like I'm an expert. And he's like, oh, do you write macros? I'm like, what are those? So they did everything in using Microsoft Word macros, Microsoft Access database servers. I didn't even know how to spell these things back then. And SQL Server, SQL, and I'm like, so it was a indoctrination. But I'll just give you like a couple of examples. So Wall Street by Fax had a fax cover page. So you would dial on your touch tone phone. There were no mobile phones. So you're like, entering a ticker symbol, and you say, I want, an earnings estimate report from First Call, and I want an S&P report, and I have so many credits on my account, and I'm going to use these credits for these reports. And 90 seconds later, they show up on my fax machine. So they had built kind of the guts of this thing, but like something as simple as a fax cover page. And I'm like, oh yeah, I can gin that up in Word. He's like, well, I know you can, but I'm not looking for you to gin it up in Word. I'm looking for you to create a Word document that has data fields in it and macros to pull from the SQL server where we have this data. And I'm like, did you just say SQL? What are you talking about? But, so he said, well, build the, the document. Here's a Microsoft Word book. And just, I'm down the hall if you have any questions. But he's like, this is the fax cover page I want to see, but it has to be dynamic. Here's all the fields that have to come from our database. He said, you can't have two spaces anywhere. You have to stylize everything. I'm like, how do you do styles? He's like, it's chapter 7 in the book. You'll figure it out. So I learned about styles, which is today CSS. It's like,
exactly.
And it took me a week to do things that ended up taking me 10 minutes, but I learned them. And he was very helpful. So that's just like one example. We did the same exercise. Once I got that done, then he set me off on Microsoft Access and learning about databases and SQL queries. And he's like, here's the report I want. You have to figure out how to do it in Access. Here's a book. And I did it again. So it was like I really learned thoroughly these concepts.
Yeah. Do you feel like that kind of attitude and approach, a little bit of, I always say entrepreneurs need to be a little delusional about their capabilities to start a business, but, a little bit of this, like being willing to kind of, play the edge a little bit, but then learn quickly and kind of backfill. Like, is this something you feel is sort of common with kind of entrepreneurs in that way? Just, I'm curious and what kind of qualities you see you have that have common and the other people in the space.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think there's maybe a couple of pieces there, but I think entrepreneurs who are like, they're just drawn to building something or creating something. They do have maybe a tendency generally to be like, all right, we're going to figure it out. I don't even know exactly what we're going to figure out, but we're going to figure it out. And maybe a confidence that, we may not know what the outcome is. Maybe at a young age, I had blind confidence that, oh yeah, of course it's going to work. And I'm like, I started learning like it's not really healthy to say that. We have no idea if it's going to work, but we know we'll figure stuff out.
Yeah.
Like we can figure stuff out. And that started to become a theme. And I think I see that theme across a lot of founders.
Yeah.
That it's less about how we're going to figure it out, more about what are we trying to figure out, and can we all get clarity about the vision and the same things that we're trying to figure out.
Yeah.
When I fast forward to my story at Jornaya, which started as Lead ID and then became Jornaya through some rebranding and things for a good reason, one of the later year lessons were, you do all this, and you have this confidence. And we always had confidence. We're going to figure stuff out. Something's going to happen here. There's something here, but challenging to figure out what and how. But then the big challenges come across the team, because the team's not all founders. They don't all have that same mentality. And they're all sort of saying, well, like, no, this is how I've learned how to do products. And it's like, I don't really care how you've learned. What I care about is this is where we're going. Figure out how to help us get there with the product.
Yeah.
But if you're going there and I'm going here, we have a problem. So, but founders do tend to have that maybe blind confidence, or at least good confidence in terms of, I don't know how, I don't know when, I don't know what, but we're going to figure it out.
Yeah. So I guess when did you decide, or when did you realize you were going to start your own company? Like how did this come into play, both kind of generally and then specifically? It was like, oh my gosh, I've got something.
So I was at Wall Street by fax, and then another company here near Philadelphia for a few years. And so I was like 27 years old, and I had this burning desire to start my own company. Again, I was still sort of this. I thought I was ahead of where I was looking back, but that probably helped me get where I was going. It's like, but I was at 27 years old, and I'm going to leave my company and go start a company. And so I started. I had learned at the second company after Wall Street by fax, like it was like an interactive voice response company.
Okay.
And we also use data, and I'm like, I have a lot of knowledge, and I learned that a lot of companies don't know how to just use any of that tech. So the idea was, I'm going to start like a general contracting company where I'm an expert. I know how to pull all this stuff together, and I can pull it together and kind of create phone applications for companies because I know how to do it. And I'll get my cost on this side, and I'll build in profit and charge this much over here, and I'm the integrator that does all that. So that was my desire. I'm like, I'm going to leave once I figure out my first client. And it turned out my first big prospect was a guy who had started a company called Targus Information Corporation, Targus Info, down in Northern Virginia. And so it's like 1997, and I'm like pitching this guy on why he should become my client. And he's like, he's an Irish guy and very charming and very open, and like, send me a proposal. I send it to him. He said, hey, come on down to Virginia, and would love to meet about this. And I had a partner who I was going to do this with, and he said, yeah, you don't need to bring your partner. Just come down. You come down. And I'm like, okay. So I met with him, and he has 3 other people with him there. And it turns out that's their entire company. There's 4 people there. So about 3.5 hours in, everybody leaves, and George Moore stays in there. And he says, Ross, would you like to become your client, or would you like to come work with us? And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm like, is this a job interview?
Yes. It's going down a different path.
And it was. He was this very savvy guy about how he, because if he had started there, I would have said, no, I'm not interested in another job. I want, So he recognized that. The long story short is he convinced me to come work for him at 27. So I started saying, I'm going on my own at 27. 13 years later, I'm still working with Targus Info. We went from that size and a small company to like 150 million in revenue, and we sold for $650 million in 2011. And I was part of that from the, almost the beginning to the end. And George became my business mentor, almost like my business father, and super individual, and just a big part of my life. So then finally, like, we hadn't actually sold yet, and I was getting a little impatient, very impatient. So about 18 months before I left, it was August of 2009, I'm like, I just got to go. I can't keep
I'm done.
doing this thing of a job. And I went to talk to him, and I said, I have to leave. And he said, well, okay. Just a very savvy guy. I learned a lot from him. He said, what's your timeline? I said, well, I don't have one yet. And I see his wheels turning. He's like, okay. Can you give me till the end of the year, 2009? Okay. So like the end of the year is approaching, and I'm like, George, what are we doing here? He's just like, well, I'm just thinking about things. And so he approaches me in like December, and he's like, Ross, next year we're going to sell, and I want you to be on the deal team. So I stayed another year. And then it turns out, well, like, you can't be on the deal team if they know you're leaving. So these were all sort of ways to keep me in for a little while longer. And I wasn't, looking back, I'm happy about it, because I stayed until about 9 months before the exit. But I got a big dividend check because we were just a cash cow. And then, so like in December, literally December 31st, 2010 was my last day, and it was a Friday. And January 3rd was a Monday, 2011, I started Lead ID. And I kind of felt like I was 40 years old. I had some money, I had the expertise, I had the network, and I started this concept called Lead ID. So that's what finally allowed me over the edge. He gave me his blessing, and it all worked out.
Yeah. It's funny. I always find that at the end, these things make sense, or there was kind of a reason it had to play out that way.
Yeah.
Does it tell me about Lead ID in terms of like, was this an idea you've been working on for a while? Was this kind of, just, something you saw as potential? Like, how did you actually get started on that?
Yeah. So at Targus Info, we had opened up a certain application of our data, Targus, in the lead generation market,
Okay.
B2C lead generation. So like mortgages, insurances, education programs. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry online. So online lead generation. And at Targus, we did a lot of lead verification. But as I got to know all the companies in that space, I learned that there was a lot of everything from fraud on the one side of leads being sold, fraudulent leads, all the way through to like perfect, pristine, compliant leads, but then like everything in between. And there was no good governing system because the leads were being sold offline. They were being sold like, hey, this guy Bruce Eckfeldt with this phone number and this email says he's in market for a mortgage. And there was no way to know if that was actually true or you're just trying to make $50 by selling his information.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were doing that.
Yeah,
and there was
sure.
everything in between. There were a lot of compliance issues like do not call and a regulation called TCPA, which is like you're not allowed to call someone's mobile phone or text them unless you have explicit consent to do so. So like if you're selling a lead, the buyer has to take the risk and they don't know if you got consent, the seller got consent. So there were all these problems of knowing like the origin and history of a lead that I had uncovered with a couple of people in the industry. And there was one guy in the industry who was just like, there's a solution to this, a technology solution. And he explained it all to me. He talked about a GUID, which is, I'm like, what's a GUID? It is 2008, 2009, and a globally unique identifier.
Yeah.
Like imagine if every lead in the world had a globally unique identifier, a lead ID. And I'm like, well, that would be cool, but like, how would you do it all? And he's like, well, if you could put code on the websites where these leads were being filled out, you're there at the origin and creation of the lead, and you could create a globally unique identifier at that time. You could give it to the website, and then if you could get the market to demand that everybody who sells leads includes this little lead ID, well, then you'd have a standard across the industry, and a lot about the origin and history of that lead to make sure it's compliant, it's a true lead with intent, and all kinds of other information that we could build later on. And it was like, okay. And so I had a couple other ideas that I was thinking about doing. I knew I wanted to leave and start something from nothing. That's the one that I thought made the most sense. I knew a lot about it. I knew a lot of people, and I just walked in on a Monday morning and said, all right, what do we do now? So,
Get going. So, and give us a little sense of the journey. Were you raising money for this, or what? How did you capitalize the business? What did you need to capitalize? Tell us about that.
Yeah. So the decision was, I had made some money, but not, I'd made decent money through compensation. I came up at Targus Info in sales and then executive management, and I had made money over the years, but I also, I went to Targus Info with no kids and ended my time there with 3 young kids and, schools and colleges coming and all the things, houses, all the, and so like a lot of compensation was sort of, I wasn't living a high lifestyle, but not a low lifestyle either. But we had made some equity monetizations before we sold the company. And so I had some piles of cash that came in all at once that, I kind of was able to put aside, but not wealthy enough that I felt like, gosh, I could just go do this without funding and not have any risk. But I talked to my wife, I talked to a couple of mentors, and they're like, if you go raise money right away, I didn't want to raise money at all because Targus never raised money until much later when it was like private equity. And I'm like, I'd rather not. I know the horror stories, I'd rather stay away from it. So let's not raise money, but like how much money can I put aside? So I basically put a chunk of money aside so that I didn't have to pay myself and I could my family could live for 2 years. And sort of estimated the expenses and stuff like that. So I was a good sales guy. I was able to. It took a year to get our first paying clients, and then we got 2 back-to-back 2 days in a row, and it was like, all right, this thing's starting to happen. But like that first year, just to give you a sense, was it was even harder than a traditional business. Like, you're selling software, you got to get buyers. That's hard enough. We had to get websites to put our code on our site, or else we didn't have a product to sell.
Yeah.
And then we had to get people to buy that product. So it was both of those things. The websites didn't really want us because they're like, well, I'm making money. Like, I don't want to upset the apple cart.
Yeah.
The buyers are like, well, if no one's using it, then I have nothing to buy.
It's a double-sided market you're trying to put in place.
So that first year was all about convincing the buyers that, look, there's a better world out there. And then convincing some of the good sellers, like, look, you'll be able to stand out from the crowd that you're willing to do this and you're willing to put your seal of approval. And by the way, if you don't, you're going to kind of start to look conspicuous in your absence, because I'm talking to all the buyers and I kind of have them on my side. And so it started to take shape in that first year. We had a couple of early adopter buyers who were like, I'm going to force the market to do this. I'm spending millions of dollars. They have to do this. You're not charging the websites, Ross, so they have no excuse not to do it. We had to work through technology issues, privacy issues, all these things, but it started to happen. Year two was like I had one technical co-founder and me. And so we started hiring engineers to keep up with things. And then I hired a guy who's working with me now who knew the market inside and out. He was kind of biz dev, sales, support, everything, marketing in April of 2012. And we started to really be able to grow in the marketplace. It was in parallel with that, I had this local investor. His name's Gil Beta. He was an early co-founder of Dakota, and that was bought by AOL and 24/7 Real Media. And he was like a seed investor. And he kept on wanting to invest, and I kept saying no. And finally, I think it was around that time, April or May of 2012, at a trade show. He's like, "What's it going to take for you to
take my money?"
I'm like, "I don't know." He said, "Well, Ross, what would you do if you had $1 million right now?" Like, I'd probably hire some engineers and some salespeople. And he's like, "And wouldn't that help you grow faster?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but." You know, you sound really charming right now, but what's going to happen when you're on my board and stuff? So anyway, we became like really good friends. I didn't even shop it. And that's when I first funded from the outside with Gil Beta. And there was some other funding along the way, but that got me to that point.
Now, did you have a particular kind of exit plan or time frame or kind of vision when you started things? And how did that kind of adjust once you took on some real outside money?
Yeah, I really didn't. I mean, I would have said I did, and I wouldn't have been lying, but it was sort of fuzzy. One of the things I learned in the later years of Jornaya, and one of the things we really teach now, is the importance of forcing yourself to sit down and kind of at least get your team together to have a view of what you're targeting for your exit. Or if you're not targeting an exit, let's be clear about that. But how are we thinking about the future? You can always adjust, but if you don't take the time to do it, you're all sort of have different thoughts, and none of them are baked. But I went in with the knowledge, the common wisdom was, well, don't have an exit plan, have an entry plan, and have a value plan. And I'm like, well, I have all those things. And that's not a bad way to do it, especially early on. It's like, look, I don't know. But I do know that I just came out of Targus Info, where we had this incredible run, this incredible exit, incredible team, and I'd like to do that again. And if you want to be part of that. And so a lot of people wanted to be part of something like that, no guarantees, but that was good enough. I wouldn't recommend that. I'd recommend doing that plus having some kind of 5 or 8 or 10 year, like, what's the headline? We do this headline exercise with clients now, where we ask the team independently, just what is the headline, when is it published, and what's it published in? And we get all the answers, and they're different. And we're like, okay, well, let's try to get one answer, at least for now, that we can all point towards, and then everything comes from that. But so we didn't have that, but I learned the headline exercise later in my journey there. But we kind of had the other components. We knew what we were trying to do in the market. We knew what would happen if we were successful, which is what eventually led to Lead ID expanding into Jornaya. Because once we had a presence across the web and we had millions of interactions we were seeing every day, there were other things that we could do with that data to bring value to the market. And that's what became this broader company, Jornaya. So
when did you feel like, oh, okay, we are now we've got an exit goal, we've got a time frame, we've got maybe evaluation. Like, when did you feel like you were now you really set that summit that you were all climbing towards, and then how did things play out? I mean, what adjusted along the way?
Yeah, it was a little bit messy because I didn't know what I know now, in terms of experience and wisdom, hopefully, and I'm still learning. But so starting in 2015, we used to have offsites, and the offsites were always good. They were always good. One of the patterns I started to see, though, was they're good, and then you get back to work, and you're still working in the same place you were before, the same habits you had before. You didn't necessarily change all that much. It's not taking away from the value of that retreat or sessions we had, or we'd have planning sessions. But I started to get this momentum around in the later years that I started to take advantage of how do you have like staying power to change habits and systems within the team? Because if you don't, it's not a bad thing to do those things, and it's nice, and it's, you learn some things and change some things, but like you're not really changing the system, and you're expecting different results. So in 2015, we had an offsite with a group called Agile Trailblazers that was sort of all about Agile, and the practitioner who I know to this day, he did this headline exercise, and that was the first time I was like, wow, we're sort of all pointed differently. We have different things that are important to us, and we're not even talking to each other about what they are. And so how can we possibly be all moving towards the same thing if we're all moving towards different things? So that was the beginning of that realization. But I wouldn't say in 2015 things really started changing. They started changing in 2017. I met another mentor who is a friend to this day, and I'm invested in his new company, and super guy. So our last investment was from Edison Venture Partners in Princeton, New Jersey, and they used to have these CEO summits, which I loved. I felt the same kind of phenomenon. It was like great, and then I would come back and try to teach everybody, but it was like hard to get the whole team behind things and really change things. But I met this guy at a CEO summit they had at Harvard Business School in 2017. Started talking to this guy, Mehdi, who was just a great friend to this day. And he started talking to me about operational planning techniques and strategic planning. And I'm like, I really like what he's saying. It resonates with me. And then he said, look, I think we ought to have like a 3-day planning session with your team. And I said, Mehdi, I'm all for it. I said, I'm worried because it's going to be great. And then you're going to leave, and then things are going to revert back to the way they were. And he said, well, we're going to have to make sure that doesn't happen. And I said, okay, well, I don't know how we're going to do that. And he said, well, I'm not so sure either, but we'll figure it out. So that was the beginning. And the one thing I did differently was I went to my team ahead of time, and I said, I got this new friend, Mehdi. I've been talking with him for a couple of months. I'd like to bring him in and have him help us facilitate these sessions. And I said, I'm asking for your trust. I'm asking for your trust because I know we've done these things before. They're always good, but I also know that there's some frustration that like our team doesn't embrace the future. It embraced the future in the same way it embraced the past, and it's like, which isn't bad, by the way. Like we weren't in a bad place, but I asked the team, I said, we're not in a bad place, but are we on a path to get where we want to go? And they're like, probably not. Probably not. We're not set up to really have the kind of exit we want. Because I had already started talking about that kind of common exit and things. So we started that process. And that's when things really started changing. I would say as a CEO, I just got your email yesterday or today about CEO strategies. And it's like our job to, to ensure we have a good strategic planning and all. And it resonates with this conversation because I'm like, I got to change. Like I have to ensure that this isn't just another great 3-day planning session that didn't really have the kind of lasting impact. And that was hard. So I had to ask my team for help. And it was like, how are we going to make sure these great things we're talking about aren't just like in the ether and then they disappear Monday morning when we get back into our grind again.
Yeah, classic.
And we started figuring some things out to do differently. we started documenting things differently. We started tying things together differently. And that's ultimately what led to my company that we just launched this year, that we're trying to kind of bring all that together under a technology roof. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
So things started to change. You actually picked sort of focusing on an exit. I guess how did that play out in terms of, once you decided, hey, look, yes, we are really driving towards an exit. This is what the time frame is. I guess, did you set any particular kind of valuation targets? And then how did you get to that point of, okay, we're actually ready to start some kind of deal search process?
Yeah. So great question. So I wish, again, I could say that it was like we did it all perfectly starting in 2017. We made some great moves, right? Yeah. It's because, of course, that's the way it works.
Yeah.
But we still didn't say we want to exit by the end of 2020 for this much money. But we started kind of talking about that informally. But what we did in our operational planning was I started learning about a process of starting from the end and working your way back. There was a great quote from the CEO of Moderna a couple of years ago on HBR. He said, most people, they start from today and plan forward. They got their list of action items and things they want to do. He said, but it's not the productive way to do it. It's a lot more productive to start at the end and work your way back to today. And then whatever you're doing today, by definition, at least in our best effort, is helping us progress towards day 2, day 4, and then year 10 or whatever. Yeah. So we had a part of that process was really getting clear on our vision and mission and getting clear on the definition of those things, because people use them loosely, and we want real tight understanding of what they actually are and keep them front and center. And then worked our way back to 3-year objectives. And really smart objectives, specific, measurable, all these, and some other things that were like, we don't want them to be the rah goals that just, we don't make our goals. And so we started changing that. Like, no, these are the things we must achieve if we want to achieve the big thing. And it's like, so let's not make them crazy. Let's make them achievable. And let's feel good about that and not say, oh, they should have been bigger and it would have made us work harder. We're like, no, I think we're working pretty hard. And let's just get where we're trying to go. So we did that. We had 7 3-year objectives that I'll go to the end and then work my way back to how we got there. But we achieved 6 out of the 7 in 3 years. The 36th month of that 3-year plan, we were acquired.
Yeah,
we're 9 figures, and it was a great exit. It was like our target was like a minimum of, I think, like 75 million. And in that time, me and my CFO were like, we'd be happy with like 80. And we got well over 100. And it was like, so 6 out of 7 of those, because we were so focused on it. So you almost manifest it to be true. But so we're going through the process, 2018. We're getting better at this process, at practicing these habits. They're new. And like building spreadsheets and documents that aren't living disparately. They're all kind of integrated in one place, and we all work with them. But we're still like newbies at the gym, so our muscles are sore, we're still making mistakes, we're learning. And we get into like 2019, and this is another lesson. There was some pressure to go out to market from some of the investors because of their funds and where they needed liquidity and stuff. And I didn't know that. Like, I didn't know that. So I was operating on someone else's agenda, and I learned the lesson of that as well. They convinced me that, it's a great time to go out, and it was. So we went out to market. We chose an investment banker, which I didn't know how to do because I hadn't learned to start at the end yet for that as well. Like everything you start at the end is best. So we got a Palo Alto investment banker because it seemed sexy. And the one thing I didn't want as a sales guy, I know this intrinsically, is like them throwing our book around and me talking to a bunch of people and, ending up
flooding the market.
Disappointed. But that's exactly what they did. I couldn't stop the momentum. And so by the middle of 2019, our company was doing fine. Like we had launched a new product from Jornaya. It was early. We were having some really good returns on it, but some problems too, like not technically, but with the value proposition. And, so everyone's looking at us and they're like, great new product, but it's not really sticking. And, so we weren't really ready to go to market if I did it again, I wouldn't have gone out. But that said, that failed process really taught me a lot. So I punted. So in the middle of 2019, I just said, guys, like, we got like 3 offers, but they weren't like rock solid yet.
Okay.
And, like, they weren't high enough. And I'm like, why are we doing this? Our company's fine. We have plenty of cash. Let's just punt and regroup. And my investors were sort of like, well, no, we want to. I'm like,
well, they want the deal. Yeah.
Where I learned that I'm like, no, this is not right for us right now.
Yeah.
So part of the regroup was, okay, I went back to like a half dozen of the people that we had talked to in that process. And I asked them, like, what was your take on us? I'm like, why did you either pass or why did you not bid what we thought we'd be getting? And just be honest, you know? And a couple private equities came back with some good feedback, and a couple of strategics came back with good feedback. The one that ended up acquiring us 18 months later, they said, look, we're a big public company. You're not profitable. We can see in your financials that it wouldn't be hard for you to be profitable.
Yeah.
You have huge gross margins, but like, you want a big number. And like, for us to run this up the food chain, a big number, not profitable, and we're a public company, it's like, and we don't know exactly the thesis. We're also not partners. We've known you guys for a while, informally, but we're not partners. If we were partners, we could say, hey, we've worked with them. And so we did 3 things. We got profitable very quickly. It wasn't that hard at that time for us to do. We created a partnership with them and some other big data companies. And we're like, now they know us and they know what we can do and what they can't do without us. And so the long story short was then we're kicking off 2020, and 2020 looks like it's going to be a great year. And then, of course, in March, pandemic hits, and everybody's like, well, the pandemic turned out to be good for us, and I mean, as far as our business, and insurance was great, and mortgage, and those were big markets for us. So in the summer, we kind of kicked off a silent process again, but we did it our way. I picked a great bank. I did it with some other data companies that had sold that I knew the people. I talked to them, and they're like, these people they're not going to pimp you out. They're going to help you get what you want. And that was some great stories in there, but I'll stop because
I mean, I think that what's really interesting to me is just starting with this end in mind. It's kind of figure out what is that end, and then really kind of driving the process, because I think this happens to a lot of companies where they're like, I think I want to sell, and then you get all these people involved, you get this momentum, and then it's going down a path that really is not. It's on their terms, not your terms, and those might be quite different.
That's
and
huge.
I think the more deals you do, you end up realizing I think everyone's got some kind of stake or some kind of angle to the game that they're trying to execute. And unless you really understand those things and set up a situation where your game is front and center, right? You're going to end up being in someone else's path and not your own. But
you got it.
What were a couple of things that you feel like you did either intentionally really well or kind of fortuitously well earlier to kind of set yourself up for a good exit? And what are maybe 1 or 2 things that you, like, if you could go back and do differently, would even help you more?
That's a great question. I'd say some of the things we did well deliberately, and I think there's always some fortuitous because it's easy to see in hindsight, but harder to see when you were in it. But we figured out our financial model really early.
Okay.
And so when I said things like it wouldn't be hard for us to get profitable, it actually wouldn't. We knew it, and we knew it because we had done the analysis of it. I had a really good CFO that I had hired before we needed one, and he's the same CFO I mentioned because he was a CFO who was willing to roll up his sleeves and be kind of a really operational CFO early on in 2013. And we didn't really we had just gotten our first funding from Gil, and he introduced me to this guy, and I'm like, he can help with contracts and different things. And I'm like, but like CFO, we're 15 people. And we got to know him. So that was a really good move because he helped us and wasn't afraid to roll up his sleeves and just do the things that needed to be done. But also then we had a CFO when the time came who knew how to also do the big boy CFO things, and he knew our business cold, and he liked our business. He and I had a great relationship, and the team had a great relationship. So that was something that was somewhat fortuitous and somewhat deliberate early on. And I think as we got closer to exit and planning all that, I think implementing some of these new strategies and really recognizing there was some sort of honesty that was maybe missing. It wasn't like we were dishonest with each other. We just lacked. And it, like I always say, a fish stinks from the head. So I looked to myself and said, sometimes I wanted to be a nice guy. And I started to learn, well, it's not always kind to be a sweet, nice guy. It's kind to be honest and really look each other in the eye and say, are we on a path that we think is going to get us to where we're going? And the CFO's like, no. And I'm like, no wonder you've been so crabby. Because he's like, we have this great company, these great people, but we're not going to get there, man. And I'm like, that's your opinion. He's like, no, let's look at the numbers.
Look at the data.
You're right. And we had to get the team in that honest, hard dialogue. And you don't have to be jerks to each other, to be honest. You can be really kind. And so we shifted a lot of that in 2017, 2018. Some of the team members didn't like it. They left.
I'm sure.
Self-selected out. They started self-destructing, whatever. And it's like, okay, this isn't for you.
Yeah.
So that was some good things. I think looking back, what I might have done differently, a couple of ideas are, the whole founder mode discussion on LinkedIn, and do you do what other people say you should do, or do you, do you? And there was a podcast with the founder of HubSpot, one of the founders of HubSpot, and he said, you got to be you. He said, I'm a quirky, weird guy. Yeah. And he said, it's a lot easier to be you than be somebody else. Be in sync with your team, and then you do the things that you're really strong at and let the universe take care of the rest. And it's like, I think some of the founder challenge is just letting go and letting other people do more. It's scary because you feel like they might screw it up. It's your baby, all those things. And so I think I would have, if I had the frame of mind to be able to do that better, I would have liked to have done that better early. And I think it would have panned out better for everybody, including my own health.
Yeah.
There's like so many of those things, but that honest dialogue led us to do things like pick a good investment banker the second time around who had our interests at heart, figure out our story that we were telling to get buyers really understanding what they were buying. And I think if you talk to the people at Verisk who acquired us, it was an incredible acquisition for everybody. Yeah, it was great for everybody.
Good ones should be that way.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that I wanted. I wanted it to be great for everybody, and it was. And I left 8 months later, but it was great for me too. It was great for everybody.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, what was it like for you personally? I mean, I see a lot of founders that, they've been putting decades sometimes into these companies, and then they exit, and without a clear plan or without a real sense of who you are and what you want to do, it can be kind of an existential crisis. Like, how did you navigate the shift for you personally, and then how have you kind of parlayed that into your next venture?
Yeah, so, again, really good questions, and you've lived it, you've seen it across other folks. I didn't, I was so excited about this planning stuff that I started saying, I can plan my life the same way, and I started doing that, but I never really finished. And it was like, and part of me was just like, look, let me just breathe for a minute. So I left in August of 2021, took a nice vacation with my family, and just wasn't getting work email for the first time in my entire life. Yeah. And it was like, this is okay. And I had started reading some things like the Daily Stoic and Stoicism. And it's just like, on purpose, I came back from our Hawaii trip, kids going back to school, and everybody getting back to life, and me not. And I sort of said, I don't want to. I just want to sit in that space, and it's okay. And very quickly, I had people calling me for help, and I'm like, I'll help you. And I was doing it pro bono for months. It was just because I'm like, it's all about planning, and it's a little bit too, they're like, planning? That sounds really boring, but I started learning, and I was traveling around because some of these people were friends of mine who had businesses, and I was just like, well, let me try to help, and I started to learn it's actually harder to help others learn new tricks than it is even yourself, in some ways, and it just started taking shape. But I found I had a lot of energy anytime I was in those settings, So I didn't want to make it anything formal for a while. That guy I talked about, Mehdi, said, like, don't jump into anything too quick.
Exactly.
So I
Yeah,
got
it's
back
like a
to
12-month. You've got a 12-month. Can't make any big commitments with it.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, I think it was probably like 2 years before I really started getting serious about anything. And I was writing checks also, and not very good at it, but I was like learning how to do that. And, so that was like those 2 years. It was like an exploration. It was thankfully kind of either old enough, wise enough, experienced enough to sort of be like, I remember some days where I'm like, I'm bored.
Yeah.
And I'm like, sit in that.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
That.
Exactly.
Like,
Don't fight it.
Isn't that so cool to be able to be bored? Like, that's amazing.
I love it.
Instead of like, oh, I can't be bored. I got to go run and do this thing and blah, blah, blah. You know, like, so that's how I approached it, philosophically at least. And it's worked out really well. I mean, there's ups and downs like there always are in life, but generally it's a really good approach.
Yeah. Yeah. Ross, this has been a pleasure. If people want to find out more about you, more about your story, more about the work you're doing today, what's the best way to get that information?
Yeah, so LinkedIn, anybody can reach out, Ross Shanken, and Vojamo is our new company. So Vojamo.com, Vojomo. It's a combination of Esperanto and Latin, meaning motion on the path. So so we think about this peak outcome.
Yeah.
And what's the motion on the path? Because there's one path, and we got to figure out what that is. To get to that peak, we also have to all be together in what that peak is. So,
I love it.
Motion on the Path, Vojamo.com. You can find me there as well.
I love it. I'll make sure the information is in the show notes so people can get it. Ross, thank you so much for taking the time today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It was awesome, Boris. It was great. Thank you.